Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show where we bring you into discussions on a little bit about everything in life. Before we start, I would like to first give a shout out to all of you for helping us reach 50 listening hours on Spotify. Thank you very much for helping us to reach there. Today we have a very special guest on the show. Let's roll the intro. I am Jeremy,
Hello, I'm King Hong.
and we have a very special guest on the show. So, welcome, Amanda Quah.
Hi everyone.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for accepting our invitation to the show on today's topic.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to introduce a bit about yourself and what your background is?
Right. So like Jeremy mentioned, my name is Amanda. I'm currently working as a school counselor. So I have a master's in counseling. My degree background basically is in psychology, and my main area of interest is actually working with children and young people. But I have done and do counseling for people of all ages.
How long have you been stepping into this field of counseling?
I think it's probably been about like 3 years or so. Yeah, about 2 or 3 years. So I'm still like in terms of experience, I'm still considered like a baby lah, compared to everyone out there who's a lot more experienced and a lot more professional as me. So when Jeremy said like, oh, we have someone really professional, I wanted to say, please don't say that. I don't really feel that professional, but yeah, I mean, it's I'm happy to be here to share whatever that I know, at least that I've learned from people more experienced than me.
When we think about counselors or psychologists, we think that, oh, they are good listeners and they are very good in dealing with problems, especially like mental problems or mental health. So many people, I'm sure, including me myself, am interested in what a counselor actually does.
So just to clarify, when you say counselor, you mean like a general practitioner, right? A counselor on a general level. Of course, for example, I'm like a school counselor, so I'm sure there's a lot of things that I do in school that maybe a lot of other counselors might not do outside of school. So are we talking about my role as a counselor, or are we talking about like counseling for counselors in general?
Let's just talk about both, like counselors in general and also what you specialize in.
Okay. So for counselors in general, technically you're not wrong. What we do is we listen to people, listen to their problems, and we kind of be there for them and support them, kind of guide them through whatever issues that they have in life. One thing I must say though, what we don't do is we don't give advice. A lot of people come to counselors expecting counselors to give them answers, give them solutions, tell them what to do. So a lot of times I have clients coming in and they might ask me like, oh, do you think I should have done that? Or do you think I should do this? Do you think I should do that? But we don't give answers. We don't give answers as counselors. What we do is we ask a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions that I think sometimes if I were on the other side and I'm the client, which I have been, by the way. So it can get quite frustrating sometimes as a client. The counselor's just constantly asking you questions, but we do that with the intention of helping you see things from a different perspective. Sometimes when you're going through a problem, when you're going through an issue, your vision is very it's tunnel. You have like a tunnel vision. You see things only from one view. So as counselors, we help you look at different perspective, broaden your perspective, and kind of guide you in the path where you can make a decision that you feel you are most comfortable with, in order to kind of promote that change in your life. So that actually is kind of the main thing as counselors that we do. It's not as easy as it sounds sometimes. Sometimes to people, counselors just you just sit and listen and you get paid for listening to people talk about their problems. Like, and my friends can do that. But it's very different because we don't just sit and listen. We also kind of have to process whatever that you say, and sometimes it's also in the things that you don't say, because in things that you don't say, there's a lot of things that we can pick up, and of course there's your body language and all this. So as counselors, we do a lot of reading, a lot of reflecting, a lot of kind of trying to understand you as a person, and then helping you kind of guide you to make that change that you want to achieve in your life.
The main reason I invited you onto the show today is because I received an entry from one of our audience requesting if we could touch a bit about mental health, because there is this stigma revolving about depression, where depression isn't actually a proper illness. Could you share with us a bit on what depression actually is?
Okay. Firstly, I'm glad that someone actually asked about mental health, because I think that takes whoever that listener was, I think it takes a lot of courage to open up this topic. Not everybody is comfortable to kind of bring up this talk on mental health and depression specifically. So back to the question, what is depression? Depression actually is an illness. So it's a very common but also very serious mood disorder that can negatively affect how you feel, how you think, and then in return also how you act. So it's actually diagnosed through criteria in the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 is like all the mental health professionals like holy bible.
Okay.
That's where your clin psychs and your psychiatrists, that's where they go to refer to. So for example, if you have certain symptoms, you need to kind of match off whatever that the DSM-5 says before you can be diagnosed to have a certain mental illness, in this case depression.
Because when it comes to depression, one thing I realize is many people are uncomfortable to talk about it. But it is also because the word depression, especially in the younger generation, as in when the person feels just maybe down or they are stressed about something, and then they will just go and say, oh, I'm depressed. But is being sad actually depressed as well?
So I think you're right in the sense that these days the word depression, I think, has been misused by a lot of people, and I think this creates a very vicious cycle that goes on. So depression has a few criteria. So there are symptoms that you must beat before you can be diagnosed as having depression, or specifically the clinical term is major depressive disorder, MDD. But I think a lot of people, like you said, when they feel sad, then they'll be like, oh, I'm depressed, I have depression. I think that's very common these days because we kind of interchangeably use the word sad and depressed and I have depression and all that thing. But depression is not just feeling sad. So when you feel sad, it's usually like for a short period of time, and usually you bounce back. Maybe let's say when you do something that you enjoy, or if you have something that you look forward to, then you kind of get over that period of sadness. The sadness kind of goes away. But with depression, it doesn't just give you negative feelings, that intense feeling of sadness for that short period of time. It's actually almost every day for at least 2 weeks. And you also have a lot of other symptoms, and it starts to affect you, your body. So there's bodily impact of the condition, depression, and you start to lose your ability to function properly in daily life. So when that happens, then it starts to move more into the depression kind of zone and less in the I'm sad category. And with people who have depression, sometimes there's no trigger. So when you feel sad, oftentimes it's something sad must have happened, something bad must have happened. Then you feel sad. There's a period of grief or anything like that. If there's a certain loss, yeah. So, but with depression, people who have depression, sometimes there is no trigger. There is no sad event. There is nothing devastating that happened. In fact, you might look at them and you might think that these people have every reason in the world to be happy because they seem to have everything and everything seems to be going right in their life, and yet they still cannot feel happy and they lose all ability to feel any pleasure, and they do not enjoy things at all. So that is kind of really what depression is. It's not just oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm depressed, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Looking from the difference that you mentioned between being sad and also depression in the context as well, is depression related to other mental health such as anxieties?
Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of overlap. For example, people who have anxiety has a higher chance of getting depression, or people who are really stressed have also higher chance of getting depression. In fact, a lot of mental health illnesses, mental health disorders have a comorbidity, which means that when one diagnosis exists, it increases the chances of you getting a different mental disorder. So it is very possible that someone who has anxiety is more likely to get depression.
Is there any symptoms that gives us a red flag that we need to seek help?
Right. Okay. If we go by the by the book kind of standard, there's a list of diagnostic criteria that clinicians will look at in order to diagnose you as having depression. So one of the symptoms must either be depressed mood, so constantly feeling sad and down, and this is almost every day for an extended period of time. And the second one is a loss of pleasure, a loss of interest in pretty much anything in life, especially in things that you used to enjoy. You no longer feel that same pleasure in doing it, and you no longer enjoy it at all. So one of these two or both are very main, is one of the main criteria when we look at to diagnose people for depression. Another thing is there's significant weight loss or weight gain. There's a big change in appetite, so either an increase or a decrease in appetite almost every day. And then there is a loss of energy, so sense of fatigue, feeling exhausted, not really wanting to do anything every day. Your thoughts become more it's difficult to concentrate. So thoughts are a bit more jumbled everywhere. It's a bit slower. You don't feel as able to kind of have that same kind of thought process as you did before. That's another thing. And also, I think one major thing is also recurring thoughts of death. If you realize that you keep thinking about death, about suicide, having suicide plans, suicidal ideation, or even suicide attempts, then I think that is a very big red flag. And usually these symptoms will last for at least 2 weeks. So if this has been ongoing for more than 2 weeks and you have some of these symptoms here and there, then I think it's a good sign that even if you might not have depression yet, it's kind of the starting. Like it might build up to that. So the earlier that you can seek help and get whatever assistance that you need, the sooner and the easier it might be to kind of prevent it from being a full-blown kind of major depressive disorder.
Like you mentioned, these symptoms last normally for a period of 2 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if I have the symptoms for 2 weeks and then it goes away after 2 weeks? Do I still need to seek help in that case?
So you mean like you've had it for 2 weeks and then it goes off for 2 weeks?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I would say still seek help, because the fact that you've did have it for 2 weeks is a sign that there is something there that could possibly come up again. But at the same time, now that I thought about it, you also have to make sure that these symptoms are not occurring because of a result of, number one, substance abuse, or number two, any other medical condition. So first, you need to ask yourself, am I having these symptoms because of a specific medical condition? So for example, I think if I remember correctly, I think people with thyroid issues do kind of exhibit similar symptoms to depression. So one thing to check out is also, could I perhaps then have a medical condition? Is my medical condition causing me to feel a certain way and exhibit certain symptoms? Or is it substance abuse? Because that can also, especially the withdrawal of the usage of with substance, can also cause certain symptoms that also mirror the symptoms of depression. So you have to make sure that it's not caused by either of these reasons. And then, if you find out that, okay, no, I don't have a medical condition, no, there's no substance abuse problem, then we can think that it's possible that it's the depression that's causing all these symptoms. So even if it's been 2 weeks and then you kind of stop, I would say still go and seek at least check it out. Talk to a counselor, a psychologist to see what's going on.
The symptoms that you previously mentioned is somehow quite similar to what we experience when it comes to stress.
Yeah.
So how do you actually differentiate between having depression, or is it just pure stress?
Right. So given that stress comes into the kind of play, then I would say that if it's stress, chances are when you remove whatever it is that's causing you stress or you resolve it, it should elevate the symptoms. It should you should feel less, if you're feeling really depressed and if you're feeling really sad about something, it should kind of help take that away. You should start to kind of feel interest in things again and whatnot. But if given that even after the period of stress has passed, or even if you've taken out whatever it is that's causing you stress and giving you that problems, and you still continue to exhibit the symptoms and still feel like you are not really, it hasn't helped, that whole stress has been taken away, then I would say that there is a concern there. But of course, that being said, I also think it's wise not to kind of take it too lightly, because sometimes with stress, you're right, the symptoms also kind of exhibit like depression. But like I told you earlier, there's a lot of overlap. So sometimes when you have a severe stress kind of problem or anxiety and all this, it can increase the chances of you getting depression. So same with for example, this listener, if he or she said that, you know, this period of stress really brought about a lot of symptoms of depression, it actually, there is a higher risk for this listener compared to someone else who doesn't feel that stressed about life and about whatever it is that's happening. So the difference is that it's really how you're able to manage the stress, and whether you're able to kind of, once the stress is done, kind of bounce back to how you were before. But if you're unable to, then I would say that then it's starting to kind of go into the territory that you might be kind of suffering from depression.
One of the concern about this listener, where he or she mentioned to me, was also because depression in our society still remains a stigma, especially towards the older generation. If we mention about depression towards our parents or grandparents, or basically the older generation, they would think that it is just us overthinking or us being weak. So how do we actually change this perception?
Okay. Yeah, I can. So firstly, I can definitely relate to this. Yeah, I think it's very common when you say that you have depression, or even if you talk about sort of even if you might not have depression, like that kind of symptoms that you have, when you start describing it to people, often you get asked questions like, "Oh, why are you being so negative? Just try to think more optimistically. Just try to be positive." Or then they might tell you things like, "But why are you so sad for? There's so many things that you have. You have a home, you have a family, you have a house, you have food. Everything's there. Why are you so sad?" And of course, like you say, they say that you're overthinking, you're being dramatic. Some also say that you're seeking attention.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think for teenagers especially, then you get called, "Why are you being moody?" Like going through a teenage phase of like having this teenage angst and all this kind of thing. So why are you being so moody? I think that's also one very common thing that people say. I will say that it's hard. This stigma question has been around for many years, and I think it will continue to be here for many years to come. I think one of the main ways that we can help reduce stigma is, number one, being open enough to talk about it. You know, as long as more people are talking about it, then people start to realize that, hey, it's okay to talk about these kind of issues. It's okay to talk about mental health, talk about depression. There are more and more people coming out to talk about it. And I think secondly, it's also psychoeducation. So talking about it is one thing, but also talking about it in the right way and giving the right information across. So it's educating people about what depression is, what mental health is, and how not every mental health issue is related to you being crazy. For example, like depression, just because you have depression doesn't mean you're crazy. And just because you need mental health assistance, be it from a counselor or psychologist and all that, doesn't make you crazy either. So I think those are the two kind of off the top of my head that I can think of steps that we can take to help reduce all this stigma that there is in society with regards to depression, mental health, and this topic.
But I mean, for the listener's concern that I previously mentioned, another thing she's concerned about is if she suspects that she is actually having depression, how is she going to explain to her parents so that she can actually seek help from professionals?
Right. So it's about talking to her. It's about telling her parents about it. Okay. So firstly, it's important to be really open. And I think in that sense is I would say to the listener, you have to be okay with being vulnerable with your parents. You have to be okay with explaining to them exactly what you're going through and exactly how it's affecting you, making it difficult for you to do any daily activities, or if it's impacting you negatively in your life. You need to be really open, and you need to be okay with telling your parents these kind of things. And it's also explaining to them, if they don't know what depression is, what depression symptoms are. It's also explaining to them, maybe an analogy might help. So, for example, physically when we are ill, let's say I have a fever, I have a cough, I have a flu, or anything like that, I would see a doctor to get my physical health checked or take medication to recover, basically, physically. But sometimes I think we often neglect mentally as well.
Yep.
So I can also be feeling mentally unwell, emotionally unwell, because of all the stresses that's happening around me. So going to seek professional help, seeing a counselor, seeing a psychologist, is kind of like seeing a doctor, but I'm doing it for my emotion, my mental health, that kind of thing. So sometimes painting that sort of kind of picture for people might be easier for them to understand. If it's okay to see a doctor for my physical health, why is it not okay to see a doctor for my mental health? Because it's a lot harder to pinpoint what's going on mentally because we cannot see it. Like physically, I can see maybe, I have a high temperature, I'm sneezing and all that. You can see it. It's concrete. Whereas with mental health, everything is it's all inside. It's not so easily recognizable.
Yep.
So I would say that sometimes giving them painting like this sort of scenario would also be easier for maybe parents to understand. And I think at the end of the day, if really your parents are super against it, even after you've tried explaining to them and kind of talking to them, then I think it's important, if you can, to seek support from elsewhere. Maybe you might want to get a friend to go with you first, or maybe if it's not your parents, maybe a sibling or an uncle and auntie, at least someone who can help you take the first steps. And maybe once you've kind of gone for one or two sessions and you really know what's wrong with you, then you can explain it to your parents. Or even better yet, some counselors, some psychologists might even might be able to get your whole family to come in together, and then they can also help kind of mediate that discussion and explanation that you need to have with your parents.
Yep. Okay, so I just hope that helps the listener if he or she is listening to this. So anyways, just to bring into the context of what is happening currently, which is the CMCO, which has been extended for the second time. And then we wouldn't know if it's going to be extended for the third or the fourth time, looking at how the cases are currently rising, especially after, they loosen the regulations and then the second day, boom, 2,200 plus. So, I mean, people are staying at home, working or studying through laptops or maybe any technological device and stuff like that. So, I mean, there is this lack of physical touch or physical attention from people around us where we get to surround ourselves with friends or maybe social life. So how has this MCO actually impacted on our mental health?
I don't know how many times it's been extended, honestly, and we've gone through so many like MCO, CMCO, RMCO, and then now we're back to CMCO. There's been a great impact on mental health. In fact, some stats were released quite recently that during the period of MCO, there's been a great increase into like hotlines calls to like befrienders, even like Talian Kasih, all these hotlines that they run, there's been a great increase in number of calls.
Because I remember there was this case where there were a lot of wife abuse.
Yes, yeah. So a lot of these cases, yeah, you're right, it's domestic abuse, because a lot of times when you're kind of stuck in the house with your spouse, it might be that number one, the relationship was not very good to begin with, and there was already abuse happening. So with cases like this, especially now that there's no escape for either parties, either the perpetrator or the victim, it might be that during normal times, maybe the perpetrator goes to work, the victim goes to work, they don't the meeting times are minimized. But given that now everyone is at home because of the lockdown and MCO that's happening, the time spent together is increased, and because of that, there's also been a lot of increase in cases of like sexual abuse, domestic abuse in the household, especially between husband and wife. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why actually the calls have also been increased in the past couple of months for all these hotlines that these people have been running.
In that context of domestic abuse, right, I think it was the government where they gave advices to the female side of the spouse about dressing up or talking
What?
like Doraemon or something. Does that actually help?
Yeah. Honestly, I think I don't just speak for myself. I think I speak for a lot of the public in saying that genuinely people were shocked when that sort of suggestion came out from the government, because
I didn't know that happened.
Yeah.
you should go and read about it. I think the Ministry of, was it Women or something like that? Yeah, they released like a suggestion. There was like some posters and all that said that, oh, you should kind of speak in a cute voice or act like Doraemon or something along those lines. Yeah. That
I feel like that wouldn't help.
Thank you. So yeah, honestly, I think that's painting things to be kind of, it feels like it's undermining the issue. It feels like they are telling women that if you be sort of very cute and physically kind of just act like a cute cartoon character, that everything can be solved. Which is not true, because maybe it might work one time. I don't know. I've never tried anything. Maybe it might work one time. Okay, just say maybe it might work one time. That one time where that
What
one
are
time
the
maybe
odds?
when the perpetrator comes
You
back,
never know.
yeah, and then you're like, oh, really cute and everything. Then they'll be like, oh, this is something different. It's quite interesting. But who's to say that that's going to prevent any domestic violence from happening? Just because I dress up as Doraemon for one time doesn't mean that whoever who's been abusing me for years is going to stop abusing me. I feel that really doesn't solve the issue at all. In fact, it doesn't even address the issue, the fact that maybe there are a lot of people out there that need help. They need a place to turn to, they need a place to go to in case things like that happen. I think instead of releasing this kind of suggestions to the public, they should instead focus on sort of coming up with means and ways on how to protect people. And I say people because it's not just women who get abused, it can also be men getting abused in a relationship. So they should think about ways of how they can protect these people, what sort of kind of help that they can provide, instead of just suggesting people to dress up as cartoon characters.
Looking in the perspective of the perpetrator, because of course the victim being abused will suffer from maybe a sort of mental health and stuff like that. But could the actions from the perpetrator or the abuser be a cause by mental health as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think again, this differs between how you choose to look at things, but I personally believe that oftentimes the perpetrators themselves might, number one, either be going through things on their own, that they might also have some form of mental disorder, or even if not, then there's a lot of childhood trauma perhaps, or there's a lot of baggage that they carry from their past that then translates into this sort of behavior now that they're adults. So I'm a firm believer that whenever things like that happen, definitely it's a sign that there's something more going on behind, maybe with the person, maybe with the family, maybe in their past, but definitely something is there.
So, you know, I read this, it was some sort of a post because I was researching on depression
Uh-huh.
when I was speaking to that listener. Because for myself as well, I encourage listeners to maybe, you know, tell us about their problems and then we could maybe speak to them about it, or also maybe make a session where we consult people with actual expertise in their problems in order to maybe provide a, not to solve their problem, but at least let them know that there are people outside who are suffering the same thing as them. So one thing this listener mentioned was that her so-called depression is actually just being lazy and mentally weak. I think it's more of the Asian concept, but when it comes to depression, you are just weak mentally. How true is that?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very common misperception, especially Asians, right? We think that if we try hard enough, we can solve everything, right? We can make everything work out.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So it's really not that simple for people with depression. It's not just a matter of like, hello, snap out of it, or like, you know, get out of it, that kind of thing. It's literally sometimes even physically impossible for them to get out of bed. Just getting out of bed is really hard. It's really, really tiring. And you've heard the symptoms, the loss of energy, the sense of fatigue, the lack of focus, concentration. It almost makes it like you can't function as a person as much because of that depleted levels of energy and all this. And it's a very vicious cycle because oftentimes they might not get enough sleep and food. Even just eating or, you know, kind of sleeping becomes things that they don't even really want to do. Even just things as simple as picking up a phone and making a call or even sending a text becomes really hard. It becomes really, really tiring. So I can only imagine how difficult it must be for them to actually get up and actually go on with their daily life and to live like as if there's nothing wrong, or to kind of portray the sense that I'm still okay, I'm not suffering from depression, which I think a lot of people do because they don't want people to know, because of the stigma, they don't want people to know that there's anything wrong with them or that they're really suffering from anything. But I imagine it must be really hard because I think we all have those days, right? We all have those days. I have those days where like I just feel really lazy and I'm just like, oh, I really don't want to get up and all that. And sometimes even on those days, I feel like whenever my alarm rings, I'm just like, no, it's so difficult. But I think for someone with depression, that must be like times 100 of whatever that I'm feeling, because everything in their body is literally just screaming at them not to get up, not to do anything.
Yep, yep.
And that's why there's a lot of withdrawal. They just kind of stay at home, don't go out and anything. It's because they just cannot find the energy in them to actually do any of these things. And you know, it's really not just as simple as just being weak or being lazy. It's so much more than that, because the symptoms of depression actually affect you bodily. It's no longer just mentally as well. Your body also reacts to it. There's also symptoms from all that. I really think that calling it weak and kind of being lazy and all that is really cruel, I feel. Yeah.
Because like even in the stardom industry, we see it, like the lead singer of Linkin Park, Chester Bennington, he committed suicide also because of depression, and then this was reflected in his previous songs before he committed suicide also. And because of depression being a negative stigma in our society, many people aren't willing to actually reach out, because I guess it is the fear for being judged on what is happening onto them. But do you think there are ways that these people could actually reach out first?
Right. Okay. I think there are things that you can try to steps, I would say, that you can try to do on your own to see whether you can kind of help get yourself kind of back to where you were. And I think some of the main things, one that I think is very important, is having a good support system. So even if you feel like you might not be ready to reach out to a professional yet, to see a counselor or a psychologist or anything like that, sometimes having a good support system can really help. It can be family members, it can be friends, it can even be just one person who you are able to be completely open with. You can share with them exactly how you're feeling, what you're doing. And this person can always kind of be that listening ear for you and that shoulder for you to lean on. So one is finding that support system. Sometimes if the support system is strong enough, that could actually be enough to get you to kind of overcome your depressive symptoms. Another thing that could help is also it's hard for people with depression, like I mentioned. Sometimes they don't even have the energy to kind of get up and do anything. But to kind of take small steps. So sometimes maybe just picking up the phone and just calling someone, just letting someone know that, hey, I'm really not good. I kind of need someone. Just taking that small steps. And then when you are able to kind of do all these small things to kind of build on it, maybe today it's just a text message. Maybe tomorrow, then it could be a phone call. Maybe a week later, you actually feel like you can actually get up and go and meet someone physically face to face to talk to them and tell them about how you're feeling. So it's really about building on all those small steps. Another thing that helps is physical exercise. So actually getting up and moving. Maybe even just a 5-minute walk can help, especially out in the sunlight, because the sunlight actually does help. In fact, in certain countries where there's prolonged periods of winter, there's actually sort of seasonal depression because of the lack of sunlight. Yeah. So in our country, we are blessed with the sunlight like all the time. So, we don't suffer from this thing called seasonal like depression. But yeah, just getting 5 minutes out in the sun does actually help. And maybe you, after doing 5 minutes and you're already out, you might actually feel that, hey, I could do 5 minutes more, just building up on those things, like taking small steps again. And these are all actually very sort of generic advice, which technically you don't just tell people with depression, you tell it to everyone. These are the things that you do to kind of get a balanced, healthy lifestyle. And there's a reason for it, because it really does help. Another thing is in terms of having a healthy, balanced diet and watching the food that you take in. So things to avoid especially are things like alcohol, caffeine, sugary foods. Because whenever like you have these kind of foods, you will kind of suffer from that. Especially with sugary foods, then you get like the sugar crash that happens. And then the lack of energy that happens after you've burned off all the sugar will be a lot more intense than whatever that you felt before that.
Yep.
So it's things like watching the food that you eat, taking in kind of balanced diet, getting enough water and all this does help your body to kind of function better. It provides it for a more, I guess, optimum kind of environment for your body to be able to do what it needs to do. And I think very, very importantly, which I think a lot of people that have depression might not see it, that I think is very important, is just to appreciate your own efforts. It's hard. It's hard to get up. It's hard to do things. It's hard to see people. But sometimes it's really about just recognizing the efforts that you've put in for the small steps, and to just appreciate yourself. Like, hey, today I managed to talk to my friend for 5 minutes just to tell them how I feel. And that's good. That's great. So it's really about validating your own efforts, appreciating your own efforts. And I think in general, just being more compassionate towards yourself. Because I think especially in these Asian cultures, we're very hard on ourselves. We always think that we need to be perfect. We need to be like up there. I need to be better than my peers. I need to do this, and that. But oftentimes we don't recognize the things that we can do. We don't recognize our achievements. So I think just having that self-compassion and just self kind of appreciation is very important. So I would say if you don't want to see a therapist, these are some of the tips that you can first try to see if all these things can help you overcome depression. But if it gets to the point where none of these work and you really cannot find a way out, then I think it is actually really high time for you to get help from a counselor, a psychologist, because sometimes depression can be really severe. And in fact, just counseling alone won't help. You actually need medication with counseling together to help you recover from depression.
Standing in another person's shoes, as in, let's say, I suspect a friend of mine is having symptoms of depression. How do I help?
Being there is very important. Just listening to the person, being that shoulder for them to lean on. And of course, sometimes I think we mean well when we say certain things, but we have to be very careful with how we phrase certain things, because it can come across as being quite insensitive or kind of undermining whatever that they're experiencing.
Yep. One thing I learned about this is that I should never say it will be okay. So that's one thing I learned.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't know if it'll be okay. What if you tell them it'll be okay and things get worse, right?
Yeah.
Then the next day they'll call you and they'll be like, Jeremy, you told me it'll be okay. It's not okay. Everything is falling apart. It's getting worse. So yeah, you're right in that sense that it's probably not a good idea to let them know that it'll be okay, because we're not God. We really don't know if it'll be okay. But I think sometimes it's really not about what you're saying. It's really about just listening. Oftentimes, these people, your friends and all that, they come to you because you're a good listener, and also to be kind of non-judgmental, to not judge them or kind of see them only for, for their depression or whatever that they're suffering, but to kind of really see them as a person and understand that they're really struggling through whatever it is that they're experiencing. And I think as a friend, listening, being there, that's really one of the main things that you can do. Of course, if you feel like it's starting to kind of be severe, and especially if your friend starts to talk about like, oh, I wish I was dead, or like, I really don't want to, I really can't do this anymore, I wish that I can just fall asleep and never wake up. Those kind of things where it's kind of going into the death talk kind of territory. I think in those instances, as a friend, kind of encourage your friend to seek help, to perhaps just talk to a counselor, professional help, and to see if really there is anything that the professionals can do to help him or her recover from depression. And I think as friends, sometimes we can also take one step further. So sometimes telling the person, like, example, Jeremy, I'll be like, oh, Jeremy, you should really see a counselor. I really think you need professional help. So I think sometimes in just offering to kind of help them, like, oh, okay, so here are a few places that I've actually searched that you can go and seek help. Perhaps they have a budget, then you might want to look into like NGOs that they can go to, or if they are okay and they are willing to pay for like a professional, then who are some of the people that you can see. And I think another step on top of that is offering them that support. Asking them like, Jeremy, do you want me to go with you for your appointment? Would you like me to be there? I can either go there with you to the place, I can drive you there, or if you want me to be in the room with you to sit there, just as moral support, I can do that for you as well, if you have no one else to do that for you. Because sometimes I think, especially going to see a counselor for the very first time, it can be really quite scary. You really don't know who you're seeing, you don't know what to expect. It's a completely new environment, a new place. I think sometimes having that familiar, a friend, a person who you can trust with you, helps you just be a bit more comfortable with the environment that you're entering. So sometimes just taking the extra step does help a person.
So basically, just before we end today's episode, I am doing this thesis on the beauty of depression. I'm actually doing this based on Georgie's Ballads One album, where he describes depression as a lack of self-love and self-acceptance. So that causes him to, in a sense, lose his identity in the process of suffering from depression. Throughout the album, in all the tracks, you do see his progression of dealing with depression, as in he learns how to accept himself. He learns that loving himself is very important in order for the formation and construction of identity. And in the end, he describes his growth in maturity as the beauty of depression. So my question here is there really such thing as a beauty of depression?
Well, I would say that for me personally, I've never been diagnosed with depression, so I really can't imagine what it's like to have depression. But I would say that perhaps there still is a beauty of depression.
Yep.
Even though it might be a very small one, I think that there still is some beauty to it. Because like the singer you mentioned, through his journey, you can tell that he's learned to love himself more, accept himself, and then kind of progress and journey and all that. And I think that's what the beauty is. The journey itself is the beauty.
Yep.
And I think it's not just with depression, but oftentimes for me it's with a lot of mental health issue, be it serious, not serious, but it's the journey. Because with depression, for example, in the journey to recovery, when you're seeing a counselor and all that, because that's essentially what happened in counselling sessions, you do learn to look at things from a different perspective. You do learn how to kind of accept certain things in life. You do learn to kind of address your own past experiences, any negative experiences that you had. And you kind of change your thoughts about them, you change your feelings about them. And to me, that is the beauty in the recovery, because you kind of see a side of yourself that perhaps you might not have before. And you also kind of realize that you do have the strength to overcome certain things that might have been really difficult for you at the beginning.
Yep.
And building on like what I said earlier about the self appreciation and all that. And I think when you're able to do all these things, you learn to appreciate yourself better. You learn to love yourself better and accept yourself better. So it sounds almost really like sadistic to say so that there is a beauty in depression. But I do believe that there is that side of it that is quite beautiful. Yeah.
Coming to the end of the episode today, do you have any advice to provide to our listeners?
I feel like I've said a lot, but I think at the end of the day, it's okay. There's a Korean drama by this name. I wanted to say, but it sounds really like kind of cliche, but it's true. It's okay to not be okay. Everyone goes through like those times. Some of us bounce back, but sometimes, you know, it's difficult and you might be suffering really badly, and you know, sometimes depression, anxiety, all these things kind of kicks in. And know that it's okay to seek help. Know that seeking help doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Seeking help doesn't mean that you're weak. If anything, stepping forward, seeking help, admitting that you need help to overcome certain mental issues is a demonstration of how strong you are, for being brave enough to be vulnerable.
Yep.
I think not
Yep.
everyone has that bravery, you know, to kind of say that I'm not okay and I need someone to help me. In fact, all of us just kind of like, oh, suck it up, let's get on with it. And we think that that's brave, you know, but it's so much braver to open up, to just tell someone I'm not okay and I really do need that help. So if you are really suffering from depression, and if you feel like, you know, certain symptoms that I've named earlier, you can identify with quite a number of them, then I would suggest that you do go and seek professional help. There are many these days that are available. To the listeners, if you feel like you don't know where to turn to, will it be okay if they like write in Jeremy and let you know, and then if you guys need if you guys need to, you can ask me. I'm more than happy to kind of provide you with some options on where you can go to and who you can see to get help. I guess the last thing I want to say is, again, just really appreciate your own efforts. Just the effort to reach out, just the effort to kind of even just let somebody know, you know, that takes a lot of strength. So give yourself a pat on the back for that.
Do you have anything to say, Keng Hong? You have been awkwardly quiet today.
Yeah, quite. Don't know what to add on to it actually.
Maybe Keng Hong is just processing.
Once again, a huge shout out to Amanda for coming on to our session today.
No problem.
Follow our Instagram page at uncover_sessions. We are on Spotify, we are on YouTube. Listen to us, give us a like, subscribe to us, and we'll see you in the next episode.